Okay, welcome back to the Barefoot Movement podcast, where my mission is to help you build a body that supports itself from the ground up rather than a body reliant on support. I'm your host, Paul Thompson, and today I have with me a super special guest, Helen Padarin. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's more of a pleasure for us to have you here. So, Helen is a naturopath, a nutritionist, a medical herbalist, and an author of some amazing books. I have the gut health book on my shelf at home that I tap into regularly to
Fantastic.
to get my cooks to cook out of. No, I do try as well.
Your
um,
private chefs.
my private chefs, that's right. So, can you add anything to that, Helen, about yourself, what you specialize in? Um, yeah, just
Yeah, sure. So I've been in clinical practice since 2001, so 17 years now. And I've I guess I've been through several little evolutions of my work in that time, as you do. Um, Early on in the piece, I did a lot of work with children with autism, and that was just an incredible experience for me because it really gave me the field in which to explore real integrative medicine. You know, we were often advised as young graduates to go and find a niche or go and find a specialty and just really focus on that. But I found, I don't know, something about that rubbed me the wrong way because I thought, particularly early on in my career when I'm still learning a lot. I mean, we're always still learning a lot, even to this day, but back then you're really green. So I didn't want to cut myself off from learning a broad range of things by focusing on one particular area. It kind of seemed contrary to the whole naturopathic philosophy. But then, fortunately, I became involved very early on with the Mind Foundation. So that's MINDD.org, and they're a fantastic organisation. They're based here in Sydney, but they provide education and resources for both practitioners, but also parents, carers, teachers, nurses, um, doctors, naturopaths, nutritionists, the whole lot. There's different streams of education about supporting particularly children with autism or autism spectrum disorders, ADHD, asthma, eczema, all of that kind of stuff. And so it was from going to my first International Mind Forum as well, where they really knitted together really beautifully the interactions between the gut, the immune system, the brain, and how inflammation in one of those systems affects all the others. You know, it's a really tight marriage. It's not an indirect association. It's very much all intertwined. And it was something that really gave me an opportunity to find a niche, but at the same time look at the whole body in a very integrative way. So I really enjoyed that and learned a lot from my years doing that. It's very rewarding work. It's also really intense work, which is why I shifted the focus of my practice a bit. And so now I still do work with children with spectrum disorders, but I do a lot more work with adults who have severe and chronic autoimmune conditions, a lot of inflammatory gut disorders, that kind of thing. So, as you might know, autoimmune illnesses have just skyrocketed in their rates in recent years. So, there's a lot of different factors involved in that, but lots of it does come back to the gut. And I'm really fortunate because with all my work with children with autism in early years, 99.9% of them have severe gut stuff going on. Sometimes actually it's not even presenting obviously, but when you look into it and then you address whatever the problems are, you start to see these systemic benefits and improvements in neurological function and motor function, and which will tie into, I guess, some of the things that we'll talk about today as well. So because it's a very passionate community that drives that field, there's a lot of research and clinical experience from doctors who have been doing this biomedical work for years, there's a lot of that to learn from that doesn't trickle down to the rest of the natural medicine community for 5 or 10 years later kind of thing. So as an example, now everyone's talking about methylation and pyrols, but when Mind first brought speakers to Australia about that in the early 2000s, no one else had heard of that yet. So it gave me it really changed how I approached all my other patients, not just the children with autism. Yeah.
So with gut health is obviously a bit of a buzzword at the moment. Can you explain, just for people who haven't heard of gut health or maybe a bit confused about gut health, like what it is?
Yeah. So obviously, I am assuming our everyone knows what the gut is, but essentially it is the tube that starts from your mouth and ends at the anus. Okay, so we're all big donuts basically, and it's a pretty important tube because a lot of us think about our gut as being on the inside of the body, but very much like a donut hole, it's actually part of our outside world, right? And so because it is a gateway from the outside world to the inside world, there are a lot of immune defenses there. In fact, more than 80% of our immune system is in the lining of the gut wall. So as a result, our immune system is what controls inflammation throughout the body. But what is going on in the gut then really affects how inflammation throughout the rest of the body is managed. And so, normally inflammation is a good thing. We have it in short bursts to heal tissue, for example, or to kill off infections and that kind of thing, because it raises body temperature and causes the redness and swelling and brings immune cells to that area to repair it. The problem that we have these days is we have all these insults and irritations to our gut lining that creates this inflammation where it just doesn't switch off, or it doesn't switch off for long. And then we get this whole situation of dysregulated immune system, and that can result in many, many, many different scenarios. So for some people, it can be localized to the gut and you're getting digestive symptoms, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, excessive gas, nausea, reflux, all of those kinds of things. For other people, it can spread out into different systems. So it could be joint pains, poor wound healing. It could be autoimmune diseases. So Hashimoto's thyroiditis or rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis, all of these things are actually tied back to gut health as well. And then on the other side of immune function, we have things like allergies, sensitivities, all those reactive kind of conditions. So, pretty much regardless of whatever it is, I often feel like I'm a bit of a broken record, because it's like, you've got something going on with your eyes or your toe or your guts or your joints, and it's like, well, let's step back and have a look at what's going on in your gut. What's going on in your gut? What's going on in your gut? Like, that's the question we keep coming back to. And I guess it's no surprise really, because as I mentioned to you before, it's such a gateway for foreign material to come into the body. Food is foreign substance. It has to go through this regulated process to get through into the bloodstream. But yeah, it is also where we're breaking down all the nutrients that we need to have the building blocks that are required to build our cells and our hormones and our neurotransmitters and our enzymes, and everything that our body is built of and everything that our body uses to function is built from what we're ingesting, digesting, and absorbing. So, yes, it's pretty important to get on top of gut health. And I think maybe like a few other little bits of trivia that just really help to illustrate how intricately entwined the gut is with other systems in the body. If we look at the gut, the immune system, and the brain, for example, as I mentioned before, 80% of our immune system is in the lining of our gut. We also have more neurons or brain cells in our guts than we do in our head brain. So our gut brain's really our bigger brain, right? So the whole thing around trust your gut has physiological basis there. It's not just in our heads. It's not in our heads. It's in our guts. Yeah. That's right. And then we have actually more immune cells in our brain than we have brain cells in our head brain. In our head, there are more immune cells than there are brain cells. So they're called microglia. So when there is inflammation in our gut, or if we have leaky gut, then we can pretty much put money on the table that we've got inflammation in our brain or leaky blood-brain barrier as well, because there's a lot of the same regulatory mechanisms involved. And then if our gut and our nervous system and it is inflamed and our immune system is overreactive and our immune system is there to protect our whole body as well, then you can just start to imagine that when we do have this inflammation and, you know, particularly when it's stemming from the gut, it can really affect every and any part of our body and our well-being.
So it's crazy, hey?
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's really awesome, but it's just crazy to think, or kind of scary to think, how big a role our gut plays, and that when it's not like functioning well, like how much can go wrong around that. So what, like obviously, if it's not working well, that can be an issue. What are some things that can cause our gut to go out of whack?
So there are a lot of things. I guess, you know, starting off with the basics and the obvious, food affects our gut. So what we put into our gut affects the environment of our gut. So what I mean by that is it can, if we put too much of a substance into our gut, then our microbes, our gut flora will try to help us by gobbling all of that up. But then that can result in overgrowths of those microbes that then cause problems of their own. So that's one example of how food can affect our guts, creating what's called dysbiosis, basically. So an imbalance of our good and our opportunistic and sometimes bad bacteria. I don't really think that there's any bad bacteria per se. It's just that they're in the wrong location in the wrong numbers. So other things that tend to affect our gut health is stress is a huge one. Okay, so we know that stress affects our digestive function, both from a mechanical and a chemical digestion point of view. So mechanical digestion is all the squeezing and the churning and the peristalsis and all the muscular actions of the gut. And then chemical digestion is more the production of our enzymes, so salivary enzymes, pancreatic enzymes, and our stomach acids. And when we're in that fight or flight mode, the production of those digestive chemicals is downregulated because our nervous system is thinking it's more important that we survive whatever this threat is that we're being faced with than breaking down this meal. Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because one of the big things I do in clinic, one of the first things I check, and it's similar to what you were saying earlier about, you know, all different symptoms, but yet you tend to come back to the gut. Well, I come back to the gut as well, but from a breathing point of view, I'm always checking how people are breathing first and foremost before I fix any biomechanical issues. And that's like making sense to me now, because when you start belly breathing and using the diaphragm, you are moving the organs, so you'll be helping that digestive, like gut health situation anyway. But you start bringing people out of fight or flight as well.
That's right.
I see a lot of
parasympathetic, rest and digest, autonomic nervous system mode, and it's in that parasympathetic mode that we can really, or dominance, I guess, that we can really digest our food the best. Yeah, when we're more in that sympathetic fight or flight, not so great.
No, and from a movement point of view, I see people tend to learn better in that state as well. And that makes sense too, right? If you're in fight or flight, you're stressed, your kind of body is thinking, like, I don't need to
get
learn
out of
anything
here.
new. I just need to
Don't worry
run.
about new information.
That's right. Let's
Yeah.
stick to the old bad habit because we haven't got time to learn a new habit. We need to get out of here for
Yeah,
sure. So the gut's obviously pretty important
absolutely.
for obviously like digestion and just general health. But from a movement point of view, I see the gut as a really important thing as well from a physical point of view, that we use our gut
Absolutely.
posturally correct as well.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a few other things that affect it too, like obviously medications can have a big impact on the gut. We know that a lot of medications have direct side effects. They're not really side effects, they're just other effects other than what they're prescribed for. Yeah. So the most commonly known ones, obviously antibiotics, disrupt our gut flora and create leaky gut, and a lot of people will get diarrhea or gastric upset after having antibiotics, or disruptions in immune regulation. As a result, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are a big one for causing irritation and inflammation to the gut lining, so that's very well documented. And antacids are actually a huge problem these days because a lot of people are prescribed antacids to deal with reflux. However, a lot of the time reflux is actually due to perhaps being in that fight or flight state and or not producing enough digestive acids. And so then there's this irritation that occurs in the stomach that irritates the sphincter, and you get the esophageal sphincter, and then you get this reflux of food and acid into the esophagus that causes that burning sensation and pain. But what happens when we have antacids is that blocks more acid production. And our stomach acid is incredibly important for many reasons. It's not just breaking down proteins. We need stomach acid to absorb minerals. We need it to absorb vitamin B12. We also need it as an antibiotic. So basically in our small intestine, it should be very, very low in bacterial growth. It's in our large intestine where we have huge numbers of microbes, okay? But in our small intestine should be next to none there. And what helps to keep that clear of microbes is really good stomach acid production and really good bile acid production from the liver, and then that's stored in the gallbladder and released when you eat fatty food. So if you have low stomach acid and low bile acid production, then you're much more prone to get overgrowth in the small intestine. So that's called SIBO, small intestinal bowel overgrowth, which is becoming a huge problem these days.
Yeah, you're hearing more and more about that these days, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and in a recent medical magazine, it's one that's distributed to GPs, and I think it was at the start of this year, and it was so nice to see it in that kind of a publication where they were talking about the problems with these antacid medications and the fact that they can actually reduce lifespan by 5, maybe up to 10 years. But yeah, the impact on the gut and longevity was significant. And when you're taking antacids, you're not actually dealing with the reason you have the problem in the first place. So it can become this vicious cycle where you need to take it. People are often on them for years, and that's just, not a good idea if you want to stay well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're on antacids, my recommendation would be to go see a practitioner who knows how to help you to get off them and to resolve whatever is the underlying problem that was causing the reflux and indigestion in the first place.
But that tends to be most conditions these days, doesn't it? Like, I know in the
yeah.
movement space,
Yeah, I think 80% of chronic health conditions are lifestyle and diet related. So yeah, there's a lot we've got to answer for ourselves.
And then we tend to want to treat the symptoms rather than actually dig deeper and do some harder work to get
looking
back
for
to
that magic pill. See, this is where humans are really weird animals because first of all, we forget we're animals. and we see ourselves as separate from nature when really we are as much an animal as any of the other ones out there. And we need to live by the laws and rhythms of nature, otherwise things go wrong. But for some reason, we as humans think that we should be able to make up our own rules, eat how we want, create fake foods, consume them, and not have any negative consequences, and then whinge and moan when, stuff starts going wrong. And it's, well, if a koala did that, or a zebra did that, they'd be having these problems too. And we do see this actually in our pets, right? The main kind of group of animals who have chronic health conditions are the ones fed by humans, yeah? Animals out in nature know how to feed themselves.
And tend to do a lot better, don't they?
That's right. And that's what we need to relearn to do. We need to relearn that we are part of nature, not separate from it. And we need to get out in the natural world more rather than in these synthetic environments that we've created with artificial light and disconnected from the earth and not touching the soil and not out in the green, and, the list goes on.
And there's more and more research coming out to show us that being in nature and being in contact with the earth or with the tree,
absolutely,
eating more naturally, moving more naturally has much, bigger benefits.
Yeah,
so it's pretty cool to see that we just, like, the magic pill seems to be, like you said, get back to living and acting more like animals do.
And it is magic. Like, before you do it, it seems like, it can seem like Mount Everest or a drag and effortful and not enjoyable. But once you start doing it and you start feeling the benefits from it as well, it's like, this actually feels really good and I'm really enjoying this, and how can I do more of it? Yeah. And you've touched on an important point there as well. With the getting outside, I've got a good friend who's a pediatrician, and she often talks about, she's working with kids on the autism spectrum as well. And so she does see a lot of children with ADD and ADHD too. But she talks a lot about NDD, which is nature deficiency disorder. And so, which most of us have now, we're not outside enough and we're inside and on screens and in artificial light far too much. So it affects our moods, our behaviors, our inflammation. Like, there's studies that show that the process of grounding. So grounding is when you're barefoot on the earth, basically. So on the dirt, on the sand, in the water, but need to be barefoot and not have anything between you and the earth. And it's been shown to have potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activity. I mean, I just find that is mind-blowingly cool.
Yeah, massively.
You need a dose of antioxidants, go walk on the dirt, right? If you're inflamed, go walk on the dirt. And that can be the case if you've got, biomechanical foot issues, or whether you've got gut inflammation, whatever it is, that's going to help. And we are seeing in research as well that grounding and being barefoot on the earth helps to relieve pain, helps to improve sleep, helps improve moods. Like, there's basically nothing it doesn't improve. So
I think instinctively we probably know that, because I know even growing up, and as I've learned more, I kind of look more into, I guess, the reasoning behind it. But just going for a swim in the ocean or a surf, like, you never get out of the water and
that was a bad idea.
And feel like sad and feel like you're still in, like, I mean, you still may have pain, but you just feel,
you get a lift from it, don't you?
Yeah, massively. And you normally do feel quite tired after it. Like, it's just
you sleep
you feel grounded. Like, it's like grounding is the right word, because you do feel grounded and sleep awesome after a great swim in the ocean. So I think we kind of know it. It's just as humans, again, trying to.
Why do we do what we do?
It can't be that simple. It should be a pill for this. It can't be as simple as going for a walk.
That's right. And we also know that being barefoot and getting grounded too helps to regulate our cortisol levels, right? So Our cortisol is one of our stress hormones, and it's got what's called a diurnal pattern, so it changes throughout the day. And when people are exhausted, particularly with adrenal exhaustion, that cortisol can kind of flatline basically. And that's when you feel like totally flat, fatigued, no energy, no drive, no get up and go, that kind of thing. It can cause low moods. And yeah, getting out in nature helps to bring back that diurnal pattern with cortisol. Cortisol is also really important in terms of sugar metabolism, so keeping our blood sugar levels stabilized, which then affects our food choices as well, right? Like if we have big blood sugar level dips, we're likely to go for stimulants that are going to give us a quick hit of energy. We'll crave something like carbs or sugar or something, starchy and sweet to get a quick hit of energy. But then, of course, blood sugar and cortisol spike up and then they spike down and you're on that roller coaster ride. So if you can get your cortisol levels right, then it's easier to make good food choices too, because you're not in that point of desperation of feed me now or I'm going to crash.
Yeah, right. Really important.
Yeah.
So while we're talking about the outdoors, how can soil help with our gut health and being outside in nature? Does that help?
Yeah,
with the gut as well?
absolutely. Hugely. I mean, we've seen for many years now the hygiene hypothesis, which is indicating that we're living a too clean lifestyle that is devoid of being in contact with dirt, basically. And, we're using antimicrobial soaps and sprays and all of these kinds of things to add insult to that injury too. And as a result of that, we see more asthma and eczema and allergies in particular. There's been some research coming out more recently as well showing the impact of being in soil, like connected with soil and your gut microbiome, to the point of you can actually help your gut microbes by sniffing soil. So this is something relatively new that I learnt. So now when I'm out in places that I know haven't been sprayed with glyphosate or any other chemicals.
Another conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So if I'm on a bushwalk or when I was over in the States in July and visiting a friend up in Northern California, doing some alpine hikes up there, and we were there sniffing the soil and getting our good bugs in. So yeah, it's another beautiful way to get earth, but also to get probiotics. And even just recently, the week before last, I was staying with really good friends of mine up on the Sunshine Coast who have 50 acres up there but live in a small one-room cabin that's awesome. And we built this steam tent by the creek and made a sauna in there, so it was just on the dirt ground. And I hadn't been feeling very good in the week leading up to that. I think I was too stressed and needed time out, and I needed grounding. So we built this sauna, built this kind of tent made with a frame and blankets and calico, and put hot rocks in there that had been heated up in a fire, and got some water and essential oils in there, and then just literally rubbed dirt all over. God, it felt good.
I did see that on Instagram, actually.
Yeah.
It did look pretty good.
It's just like the best medicine, and it's the same, I love going in the ocean as well. You never go in and go, well, that was a bad idea, or, you don't feel worse afterwards. You're like, whatever you're feeling, you always feel a few notches better.
Yeah, and it's always easy to let go of the mind and some of those stresses of life you're getting out in nature. So just for anyone that sees Helen out there sniffing soil, there is science behind this. She hasn't lost the plot.
Some people will argue that, but yeah.
So our mutual friend Carl had sent a message through Carl Hemington. So I'll actually be trying to get him on soon. He's going to be another very interesting person to chat to.
Yeah, he's great.
But he'd asked about the effects of microbiome and the potential effects or nil effects that may have on fungal issues. in the body or skin. Do you have any comments on that? Any just thoughts? Or
I've got a couple of thoughts on that, and part of it is from clinical practice and part of it is my speculation. If we look at, foot fungal infections like tinea, athlete's foot, for example, typically, or toenail infections as well, fungal toenail infections. Typically when these happen, like I ask all my patients in an initial consult, do they have any of these things? Because while they don't seem like they're close to the gut, it is an indication of what is going on in the gut. So typically if people are getting those infections, there's going to be yeast overgrowths in the gut too. That's kind of where it all stems from. And that's why you can be using topical applications for years on end, and they can be really hard to get rid of because you're not actually dealing with the source of the problem. So in the sense that we know that being in nature and being in dirt positively affects our gut microbiome, then that would make sense then that it's going to help prevent things like tinea, right? Or fungal toenail infections. On the same, so then into the bit where it's speculation. I don't know if there's been any studies done on this, but I guess it would make sense if you're bathing your feet in probiotics, and that's only going to help with the microbial composition on your skin. So, and that would surely bolster defenses against potential fungal infections. So I don't know that for sure. I don't know if there's been studies done on that specifically, but it intuitively makes sense.
Yeah. And it would explain potentially why some people are more resilient to picking up like fungal infections, especially on the feet. They might be in the same family, and you'll see one family member has tinea, which can be pretty contagious. They'll be showering and whatever, but the other family member doesn't have any symptoms. So there could be a correlation.
People go to gyms and yoga studios and there's 30 people having a shower, and some people have, warts and tinea infections on their feet, and some people will go, I've spoken to many people over the years, they're like, the moment I use a public shower, I'll get a tinea infection or something like that. Whereas other people, most people, I guess, will use thongs or something in public showers. But even if you don't, there are people who will go in there and not have an issue at all. There's more resilience against getting such infections. So, I think a lot of that comes from the state of your gut, the state of your immune system. Do you have any underlying overgrowths or dormant infections and things like that?
So do you think, you mentioned warts before, do you think there could be a correlation between warts and gut health as well? Because I see a lot of people that come in to the clinic with warts on their feet. And again, they might have family members that don't. They might have just little outbreaks, which can be from stress as well. But do you think there could be a whole gut thing going on there?
I think it definitely plays a role from what I've seen. Again, I don't know. I have to do some research on whether there is any research on a direct link between the two. If there's not yet, I'm sure there probably will be in coming years. Because the whole field of research is just growing so much. But generally speaking, you're dealing with an infection, right? And so, again, any infection, regardless of whether it's a plantar wart or tonsillitis, is being managed and fought by your immune system, which is mostly in your gut and affected by any inflammation in your gut. So, and the important thing about gut regulation and inflammatory regulation is that it largely, the thing that it depends on most is the composition of your gut microbiome. So your gut bugs are basically at the switchboard of your immune system, dictating how you respond to different things. So how you respond to a pathogen, how you respond to a potential allergen, how you respond to a potential toxin, all of those things are largely regulated by your gut bugs.
So a lot more research probably needs to be done to to see what else correlates
and
with
we're
all
just
this.
like at the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's a lot of it coming out in the last 10 years, especially. Hippocrates said hundreds and hundreds of years ago, all disease or all health begins in the gut. And now with science, we're actually starting to see the mechanisms behind that. He was way ahead of his time. He really saw the connections there. And I don't know, maybe it was easier to see back then because now we like to compartmentalize everything so much and make everything so complex, but really we can make things as complex or simple as we like, and it can be made very simple.
Yeah, which is how we should keep it, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you mentioned, obviously with poor gut health, there's inflammation. Can that then obviously inflame things like joints and then affect the way we move?
Yeah, very much, very much. So there's big connections between gut inflammation and joint inflammation. There's actually big connections between gluten and rheumatoid arthritis. So gluten, we know in 100% of the population, thanks to Professor Alessio Fasano at Harvard. He's a gastroenterologist crush of mine. He did research showing that in 100% of the population, whether you have a problem with gluten or not, gluten increases gut permeability because it increases this enzyme called zonulin, which increases the gaps between our gut cells, the lining of our gut cells. So when that happens, you have this kind of gateway to the rest of the immune system. Molecules that would normally be too large to be absorbed through the gut wall into the bloodstream can get absorbed. Now, our joint capsules actually have a really similar, a similar kind of membrane in that gluten can affect the permeability of the joint capsule as well. So that's where, I just spoke with someone yesterday actually who had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. She also has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition, which is also strongly linked with gluten. And when, she was told basically you're going to have to deal with this for the rest of your life, within 4 or 6 weeks of stopping gluten, absolutely no joint pain. She'd had debilitating joint pains and loss of movement in her hands. And yeah, so this is just one example of how food and leaky gut can affect our joint health. Also, when we have inflammation in the gut, what happens is it's what's called visceral inflammation, so inflammation of the organs in the abdomen. And this happens with the gut, but it also happens with pelvic inflammatory disorders. It happens with things like endometriosis, fibroids. So women have more issues with visceral inflammation in general than men do. But when we do have any of this visceral inflammation, what it does is it actually inhibits our stabilizer muscles in our core. And if we have inhibition of those stabilizer muscles, then our skeletal muscles try to step in to compensate for that. But our skeletal muscles are not made for that role, and they don't do a very good job of it. So that's when you get muscle tension, pain, tightness. You often will get lower back pain is a very common sign of visceral inflammation, so inflammation of your gut or pelvic organs. And then, as you would know, this is getting more into your realm then, when you don't have that core stability, maybe your glutes aren't firing properly, maybe your adductors aren't firing properly, maybe they're too tight or not firing enough. That can translate to knee problems and ankle problems and foot issues, and because your bum's not firing, you might get bunions, so
Yeah.
That's just one example of many in terms of how it can affect our joints, our stability, our balance. So again, far reaching.
It's crazy though, because I normally start in the gut when I'm fixing movement, because the importance of a strong, stable core is evident in babies, right? They can't roll over or go to crawling positions or up to even standing until they can own each position with the core being strong and them owning the breathing. So if we're inhibiting core muscles, we're essentially taking away the first thing we need to develop as kids to be able to, go into bigger movement patterns. We're then taking that away as adults or even as kids and hoping that everything else will come and pick up the pieces. But what I see clinically quite often is lots of compensation patterns. Like someone will come in with, say, heel pain or knee pain, whatever the symptom is. And again, as humans, we get so focused on that pain and wanting to fix that one thing. And this is where I constantly get stuck into arguments around orthotics and things because, sure, we can prop it up and take away your symptom, but there's always something higher up that tends to be causing the issue. Yeah. And here's just another prime example of that, can be further up in the core or whatever, but we need to look even deeper that it could be the food we're eating that's actually turning the core off, not just like physical things that we're doing to turn it off. There can be a food link there as well. So the food side of it, which is why I was really excited to talk to you today, is that we can't not look at food and gut health when we're looking at movement patterns as well and physical, physical pains in the sense of like movement pains, like knee, hip, ankles.
And if people are having movement pain or prone to injury, just a little side note before I get onto that. I mean, you see this a lot, for example, in kids who have dyspraxia, who uncoordinated movement and are constantly knocking themselves because they're walking into things, or they'll end up with bruises, or they fall over when they're running and all of this kind of thing. And a lot of that can come back to gut health again because that core stability isn't there, right? But then if we're looking at chronic pain or injuries that won't heal, that's going to be a very long, drawn out and possibly never ending process if you don't deal with nourishing your body with what it needs. So minimizing inflammatory foods, having gut healing foods, making sure your gut lining is healed and sealed so you're not triggering a systemic inflammatory response, and also making sure that you're eating those nutrient-dense foods with the nutrients in there that you need to actually rebuild those tissues. It doesn't just happen like that. You need the right building blocks. It's like if you're building a house, what are you going to build it with? Are you going to get some, rubbishy material that's going to blow over as soon as there's a storm or some rain, or are you going to get some good quality material and build a fortress kind of thing? It's the same thing when you are recovering from injury. You want to put the best ingredients in so that you can build the strongest structure. Yeah,
definitely. With building better tissue, you've got a great blog on your website around nutrition for healthy connective tissue, which I'd highly recommend reading. It's a really good read and explains it really well. But just quickly for those who may want to know now, they haven't got time to wait to jump on your website and read through all the gold on there. What is connective tissue and how can food nourish our connective tissue?
So connective tissue is what holds us together, right? Without it, we'd be a mess, quite literally. We wouldn't be held together. Our connective tissue is our bones, our skin, our ligaments and tendons, our fascia, the stuff that holds all the different parts of us together is made of connective tissue. And to build good connective tissue, we need good quality collagen, basically, which we can get directly from certain foods like bone broth, for example, or meats that have the kinds of meats that you need to slow cook rather than, your prime cuts of steak. You want the meats that have all the connective tissue in them, so the jointy bits. Really good sources. They're rich in amino acids like glycine, for example, so we need lots of that for connective tissue repair. Vitamin C is incredibly important for connective tissue repair. So best sources for that, well, in Australia, we've got actually the highest source vitamin C food in the world that we know of so far, and that's the Kakadu plum. So most commonly that's available in powdered form, but if you're lucky, you might find it in some gourmet delis or good health food stores in the freezer, or if you're in outback Australia, then go for it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, fermented foods, fermented veggies are a fantastic source of vitamin C. So with vitamin C in cabbage, for example, you'll get between 50 and 100 times more vitamin C from fermented cabbage than you do from raw or cooked cabbage, and that happens with all the other veggies too. So getting those fermented foods in not only provides enzymes and probiotics, but also lots of vitamin C. Zinc is very important, and it's something that we see in Australia and New Zealand. There's huge problems with zinc deficiencies because there's not a lot of zinc in our soil in these countries, and so it's very hard to get adequate intake in. And the best source of zinc is oysters by a mile. So a weekly dozen oysters would be great if you're in a place where you can get some nice good quality oysters. I love South Coast oysters personally from Clyde and Merimbula. Yum. So yeah, oysters are fantastic in terms of zinc. The next best sources of zinc are beef and venison, and then we're going down the line to things like pumpkin seeds. So yeah, but the difference between that and oysters is massive. I can't remember the milligrams off the top of my head, but it's a big difference. And what else? Things like manganese, magnesium's important as well. There's a whole host of mineral cofactors that we need, but the top guns would be the vitamin C, the zinc, the collagen, things like the glycine, that kind of stuff. So yeah, bone broth is like one of the most amazing foods for healing not only the gut, but also helping with joint and tissue injuries as well.
So people that are hypermobile and have sort of too much movement around joints, do you think upping their intake of like bone broths and all these things you just spoke about could potentially help with hypermobile people?
Yeah, it could potentially help, and very important to make sure that there isn't any chronic gut inflammation going on, because that inflammation will increase the mobility of the ligaments as well. This is one reason, like, for example, throughout the menstrual cycle, our ligament tension changes, right? So particularly during menstruation, there's inhibition that results in the tendons and ligaments being looser, basically. So women are actually more prone to injury, particularly lower back injury while menstruating. So it really, kind of irks me when people, women and men, go in with the attitude of, doesn't matter if you got your period, you can still, it's no different from any other day, or you just push it as hard today as any other day. It's like, actually, no, this is not the time of the month for you to be doing that. Again, as with everything in nature, there are rhythms and cycles, and we're not meant to be on the same, in the same gear all day, let alone all week, all month, or year, so there's those monthly cycles as well. So it's really important to, honour and respect that, and do appropriate gentle movement during that time where you're not likely to injure yourself.
Really good advice there. I've never really thought about that in that way, but that makes a lot of sense.
So important.
Yeah. That's great. So I can edit this out.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So when we first met, it was at the Wellness Couch event in Kiama, which is close to where I live. And I guess what I was most drawn to, you were speaking down there at that event, and you made everyone get their shoes off, and had pretty much advocated that everyone should be moving barefoot, especially in nature. And we got chatting about obviously different barefoot things and the garden, some of that linkage there when we met. But and I've also noticed you wear a lot of barefoot shoes where possible. We had a chat about that. Can you, just to wrap up, can you explain your barefoot journey and I guess how it came about, how you incorporate it these days into your life and the benefits that you see from it?
For sure. So it's been probably, going on 10 or 11 year journey for me in that respect. It started, I guess, at a very young age. I always had a lot of biomechanical issues, joint pains. Like when I was in primary school, I got tested to see if I had rheumatoid arthritis. In hindsight, I can tell that it would have been the gluten, knowing how I respond to gluten now. However, at the time, that was not known. But yeah, always had joint pains. Like if I played tennis, I'd get a sore elbow. If I went swimming, I'd get sore elbows or shoulders. It would really frustrate me, and to a lesser degree, because it's not such a problem now, but at times it still does, because I do love being active. I do love being outdoors, but I'd find that, oh my gosh, I've got something else that's causing pain now. What's going on? Anyway, I injured myself while I was hiking in 2007 or 8. I think it was the start of 2008. And I love hiking. It's like, that's my soul food. I love getting out in the bush, everything I need on my back, stay out there for days. It's like, it's the ultimate earthing experience, right? So on a hike, I injured my leg, where basically my fibula head on my right leg dislodged as I slid down a boulder, and my foot got stuck. And I had to walk on that for the rest of the day, sat in a creek that evening as my ice was not enjoyable at all, and was in a lot of pain walking out the next day. And that was really basically a 10-year journey that really only resolved February last year. So when that initially happened, I was wearing, the hardcore hiking boots that are, coffins for your feet. And now
as we should, though, isn't it? That's what we're supposed to wear, apparently. But,
yeah. So, the gold standard of hiking boots has been these things that you can't twist or bend and have ankle support, so you can't even move your ankle. And it's like, no one, it's a recipe for disaster, basically. Anyway, from that point, I basically couldn't wear shoes without being in pain. I had to be either barefoot or wearing Vibram 5 fingers. For years I wore them to work every day in the office as well. I would not wear shoes, because even the softest runners that had heaps of flexibility, I'd put them on and it made my feet feel dumb, is how I would explain it. My feet just felt dumb, because as I got used to being barefoot and
that's the best.
Yeah, well, they just what I learned from being barefoot and wearing 5 fingers is your feet pick up so much information from the ground, so much information, and they send that information up to your brain, and your brain sends that information back down to your muscles to say, you need to fire your glute here and this muscle there, and it's telling you what you need to do to stay balanced and stable. And when I put shoes on, it was like my feet had blindfolds and earmuffs on. Like they couldn't pick up any information to send to my brain. My brain couldn't tell my muscles to fire. And then I would end up in pain. And it just became, blaringly obvious once I got used to that. So then I was working with Czech trainers, a guy in Sydney initially, and then I moved to New Zealand, and I was living in New Zealand for 4.5 years, and that's where I met Carl Hamilton, one of your other guests, and he's just a phenomenal biomechanic. Like I have so much respect for him, and he really looks at biomechanics from a very holistic point of view as well, taking into account, your stress levels, your sleep, what you've eaten that day, do you have your period, like all of those things that so many trainers and biomechanics just don't look at, but play fundamental roles in how your body works, how your body moves. So yeah, did a lot of work with him, had to kind of learn to run. I could never run without getting shin splints, and running with bare feet. The first little running exercise I did was 10 laps of 30 seconds, and I couldn't walk for 4 days because my calves were so sore, because it was the first time I'd actually used those muscles for running.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a big journey. And then I tested it out a couple of years ago with a hike on Kangaroo Island, and then last year in February, March, I had a big mission to accomplish. 10 years ago, just at the time I injured my leg, I decided I wanted to climb Mount Aspiring in New Zealand. And then this happened, and it was like, there's no way that's possible at this point of time. Anyway, decided to do it, have a friend who's a mountaineering guide, and he took me up there. It was a 24-hour expedition from leaving the hut to getting back to the hut.
Wow.
And on the practice days beforehand, we were abseiling into crevasses and ice climbing out and practicing arrests, like if we fall down a slope, because obviously snow and ice is slippery. And on those practice days, my leg was starting to hurt, and I thought, oh gosh, I don't know how this is going to play out. But at the same time, I thought, I have got this far, I do not want to not do this. And I said to Gavin, my guide, I said, and I'm not a drug taker, like I don't like taking painkillers, I don't like taking anything unless it's an emergency. Obviously that's a different situation. But I said to him at that point, I think you need to make sure that you've got the hardcore painkillers with you when we go up, because I'm going to need them coming down, because it only hurt coming down. And anyway, it was one of those kinds of fun that you don't enjoy at the time, but afterwards you're glad you did it.
Yeah.
It was an incredibly challenging climb. It was like doing 12 hours of toe raises or heel raises, calf raises in ice climbing gear with crampons on, and climbing up, I can't remember now how many pitches of rope. And I was so physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted by the time I got to the top, and I had my first panic attack ever in my life as the sun was going down. I was like crying and snot coming out of my nose and like, please call a helicopter. Anyway, he did not call a helicopter. I was tempted to throw one of my crampons off the mountain so he'd have to, because that's deemed an emergency. I didn't, and to be honest, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the catharsis because there was a lot of screaming and swearing going up in areas where I thought this is beyond my capability. So there was, a lot of emotional expression on the way up the mountain, whether it was that, whether it was the 12 hours of calf raises that repaired it, whatever it was, I don't know. But going down, I didn't have any pain at all, which was quite remarkable. And then only 2 weeks ago, when I went through the little patch of not feeling so great that I mentioned before, that was the first time my leg hurt since then, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, but it only lasted a day and it went away, and my gut was not feeling good that day. So
there you go. What an achievement,
parasites, though. But no parasites. So yeah, that's been my journey. What
an amazing achievement.
Thank you.
Getting over the mountain and back down.
It was pretty awesome. Yeah. So yeah, I can highly recommend doing that kind of an adventure. First Light guiding, if you're keen to check it out.
Awesome. And during that time of obviously Barefoot was feeling better, were you doing exercises around your feet to build strength, and it wasn't just a matter of solely the barefoot shoes.
Oh, no, yeah. It was, the work that I did with Carl and other trainers was really to, get glutes activating, get the right muscles activating, get my joints aligned. There's been a lot. I worked on every levels, but definitely strength and stability training for sure. And then, a lot of emotional work, spiritual work, like, when it's something that stops you from doing what you love, it brings up a lot. So you address it in any and every way that you can.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to note that, like, it is a journey. You mentioned it's been 10 years, and it's not always that it's a super hard journey. It's just something, I guess it's the same with gut health. I see it with like movement, corrective health. It's something that you need to commit to, create more of a lifestyle around it, and you actually choose that way of wanting to live and move.
And it gets, generally speaking, it gets easier along the way. Obviously, in life, there's always going to be road humps and challenges, but
they're just there to make us want it more, isn't it? Just to check that we still want that.
Exactly. And I think all you have to do, and this is why I run programs like 9v9, which is on at the moment, because it's just an opportunity for you to experience how bringing in one single change in your lifestyle can elicit a lot of positive impacts. And when you start to feel like, oh, that actually made a difference and I feel better, it gives you more inspiration to do more. And so it starts giving you energy. Like initially, to make change, we usually need a bit of discipline and motivation. And motivation requires you to give energy, right? It requires effort. But inspiration, once you start getting inspired because you see, or more importantly, you experience the impact of your choice, that gives you energy. So then it becomes an adventure, then you can enjoy the process more. And yes, there'll be times where it's like, oh, this bit's hard again, or I don't know if I can do this bit, but then you do it and you're like, oh, that was awesome. And, it just keeps unfolding. So I feel so much better now than I did 20 years ago. And I would like to continue that pattern, for many decades to come.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned 9v9.
You're getting old, things start going wrong thing. Like, we can do a lot to look after ourselves.
Oh, definitely. And we need to take that mindset on more, I think. You mentioned 9v9. Just to finish up, can you, I know it's on now, but this is something that keeps coming
so we run it a few times a year, and we're looking at creating an evergreen, so a version of it that will be available all year. But we do group ones a few times throughout the year. And basically 9v9 is just a 9-day challenge to eat 9 cups of veggies a day for those 9 days. And because regardless of what your dietary approach or philosophy is, the biggest deficit in most people's diet is not enough veggies. And there are so many important phytonutrients, minerals, antioxidants, all those kinds of things in plant foods that have massive impacts on our health and well-being, that it's just so important that we get more of them in. And the differences that people feel in just 9 days, that's why I kept it at 9 days as well, is because it's short enough that it's easy to commit to, but it's long enough that you really get to notice some big changes. So, it just, every time it blows me away, all the feedback that we get from people. It's really awesome. So we're right smack bang in the middle of it now, but we'll be running another one in February.
Perfect. And where can people find 9v9?
So they can find that at padarinhealth.teachable.com, and you'll see details for that and the gallbladder flush there.
Perfect. And your website?
helenpadarin.com.
Which you should definitely check out, because like I said earlier, there's heaps of gold on there, including the books that you've been a big part of.
So the books are I've written Baba Yum Yum with Charlotte Carr and Pete Evans. It's available on Amazon in print and on iTunes as well. We've got the Complete Gut Health Cookbook, and I've written a couple of chapters in Clinical Naturopathic Medicine, which is a textbook, so that's more for practitioners rather than the public. But yeah,
Not an aeroplane read.
no.
And if people want to connect with you on social media, which again I really advise you do because you're always putting up cool things of what you're up to, especially your Insta stories. There's lots of educational pieces on there too. How can people connect with you?
So both on Instagram and Facebook, my handle is at Helen Padarin. Easy as that.
Easy. So thank you very much for coming on today. I've learned a lot. I'm sure people listening in would have learned a lot also. So thank you very much for your time.
It's been my pleasure to be here. Such an honour. Thank you very much.